We are gathered here today to pay our respects and to celebrate the life of George Ferguson, better known to us, some of us, as Dad and others as Granddad. I just want to start off by saying that Dad had an amazing life and an extremely long life and did so much for all of us that are here today. I would like to take this time to just discuss a bit of Dad's history so we can clearly understand and see the things that Dad did for us. The Ferguson family lived in Port Elizabeth, but Granny went to Johannesburg in the last days of her pregnancy, so Dad was born in Johannesburg on the 12th of May 1931, and in fact he was baptized in the Anglican Church on the 7th of June 1931 in Johannesburg. Shortly after this they moved back to Port Elizabeth. During the war, once again Dad's father went off to the war, the Second World War, and the Ferguson family, which consisted of Dad, his mom and his younger brother Robert, who we knew as Bobby, moved to Johannesburg to stay with our great-grandfather during the Second World War. It was during this time of living in Johannesburg that Dad got the opportunity to attend Jeppe Boys High, which at the time was a very good school. When the Second World War came to an end, Granddad arrived back from the war and the Ferguson family moved back to Port Elizabeth. Dad then finished school and he studied a trade to be a motor mechanic, and he worked at Ford Motor Company in Port Elizabeth during this time. Dad had met a lovely girl on the beach, in fact Summerstrand Beach in Port Elizabeth, and was invited to attend her 13th birthday party. Little did anybody know at the time that this young girl would turn out to be our mother, and once Dad had finished his trade, they had decided to get married. It was during this time that Dad had seen that working as a motor mechanic was not going to be able to take care of him and his family, the family that he wanted, so he started looking for alternative jobs. The two opportunities that arose was to take a job on the mines on the East Rand in the Witwatersrand of South Africa at the time, or he also did some voice recordings for a radio station called LM Radio, which was transmitting out of Lorenzo Marx at the time, and Dad was accepted as a DJ at the radio station, but he chose to go to the gold mines because this was a very well-paying job at the time and he could take care of his family. Now, before Dad took his job in Johannesburg at the mines, him and Mom got married, and they got married in Port Elizabeth on the 15th of May 1954. The wedding was brought forward by a month because Dad's grandfather was about to travel to Canada to see his brother for the first time in many years, so they moved the wedding forward in order for him to attend their wedding. After the wedding, Dad traveled to Johannesburg and he accepted a job on the mines, starting to work as a miner in the mining industry. Shortly after he got settled in his job, he went back to Port Elizabeth and fetched Mom, and she moved to Johannesburg with him. It was at this time in August 1955 that Alan was born in Denota. Dad worked his way up in the mining industry, and while he was doing this, he also managed to have the rest of us kids, so there were in fact 4 of us at the end of the day, and Dad was working very hard on the mining industry in order to provide for his family. Dad always loved his holidays, so every year that I remember as a child, right up until I finished school at 17 years old, we had annual holidays with our caravan as a family to amazing destinations around South Africa. What I'll never forget is that Dad not just do these holidays for himself, but it was for us as kids. And what I remember clearly was him driving the caravan and putting it up at Murray Park, Caravan Park, during the school holidays, so we could all have a holiday, and Dad used to get up every morning and drive to work from Murray Park, Caravan Park. So this just shows you that he was doing this for us and not just for himself. There were times in growing up where a certain birthday came about when between Mom and Dad they had sat down and discussed what we should be given as a present. Alan was the oldest, and I remember when he turned 16, Mom and Dad drove him off to the motorcycle dealership, and he could look around there, and what he didn't know is that the red Honda 50cc motorbike that was standing there was actually his present that they'd already bought. And he then was suddenly free by having a motorbike and being able to get around from that day forward on his own without needing Mom and Dad to take him anywhere. Another time I remember was when Anne turned, I think it was 12, and she had always wanted a record player. Record players were extremely rare at this stage, and Mom and Dad had secured a portable little red record player that ran off batteries, or it could run off the mains, and this was extremely appreciated not just by Anne but the whole rest of the family, who played many records on that record player and took it on holiday with us, and many parties were held at the house using that record player. David, when he was turning, well, he was still 15 at the time, was selected, this was I think 1974-75, was selected to represent South Africa at the World Scout Jamboree, and Mom and Dad sat down to discuss how they were going to afford for David to be able to attend the World Scout Jamboree, as it was very expensive, buying airplane tickets and paying for his costs to do this event. But Dad, being the guy he was, managed to put together everything financially so that David could attend the World Scout Jamboree and represent South Africa. In fact, he turned 16 overseas on that holiday, representing South Africa at the World Scout Jamboree. Myself, I know that when I had turned 16 and I was getting towards my 17th birthday, that my mum's car was allocated. She had had a new car at that stage, but her old car was parked in the corner, and that was going to be mine for my 17th birthday so that I could have transport to get around. These were just small examples how Dad, together with Mum, worked out how to take care of us as a family and give us the things that we appreciated. Mum and Dad decided to go on an overseas holiday in the mid-70s. However, this was all cancelled so that Dad could study and write his underground manager's ticket, and therefore they gave up the holiday so that Dad could concentrate on his studies. And I remember Mom and Dad sitting every night going through particularly geology, which Dad did not like. And that year, 1975, he wrote his exam and passed his exam. Actually, it was 1974. He wrote his exam, passed it, and was then promoted as an underground manager in the gold mines. We then moved to a new destination due to Dad's appointment, and then it was decided by Mom and Dad that David and myself, who were the last two at school, should look to go to boarding school because they were moving around quite a bit at this time. So they wanted stability for us and our studies. So David, who was in high school at the time, was sent off to Potch Boys High, and a year later I joined him at Potch Boys High to be in a stable environment while Mom and Dad moved around. One must remember it was obviously far better for Dad and for Mom to have us at home, but much cheaper. but Dad chose to put us in boarding school where we could be in a stable environment and continue our studies while they moved around due to work. In about 1978, while at boarding school, Mum and Dad came and fetched me one weekend, and we were driven down to the Val Dam to a new boat that Dad had bought. Dad had bought a 21-foot sailing boat called La Belle, and all of us as a family were on this boat traveling around with the German owner who sold it to Dad for the day to get to see the boat and how it all operates. And we spent many sailing trips on that boat before Dad decided that a bigger boat was required, and in 1980 he sold La Belle and bought a Mura Holland deck. I remember going with Mum and Dad to the factory in Kempton Park where the hull was being built, and it was delivered to our house in Cartonville at the time, 12 Dahlia Road, and Dad started diligently working on this boat to get it completed. What I remember clearly was every night, well every afternoon, he would arrive from work at 5 o'clock, change his clothes and go and work on the boat until my mum called him for supper, and straight after supper he would be back on the boat till 10, half past 10 at night, every single night of his life for 5.5 years. Every weekend, Saturday morning was shopping for groceries and things we needed at the house, and then he would be back on the boat working the entire weekend on the boat. After 5.5 years, the boat was put onto the Val Dam when it was completed, and we had many good sailing weekends and Christmases down at the Val Dam, where Dad got everybody to bring Alan had a caravan at the time, so the caravan was brought down, Dad brought his caravan down, and the whole family enjoyed Christmas dinner at the Val Dam all together. That was always very important for Dad and for Mum, to have a Christmas dinner for all of us together as a family. And this was one of those times when even being at the Val did not stop that. Dad was awarded his 25-year service medal working for Goldfields of South Africa, and shortly after that he was 55 years old when he took a early retirement, however was contracted back by Goldfields to be the mining consultant for an additional 5 years. So Dad worked till he was 60 for Goldfields of South Africa, so entire 30 years of his life for Goldfields. And on retirement, Dad made the decision that they were going back to Port Elizabeth, and they took the boat, moved it down to Port Elizabeth, bought a house in Port Elizabeth, and Dad started enjoying his retirement in Port Elizabeth. He was still actively sailing at this time, got very involved with the Algoa Bay Yacht Club, was the rear commodore of the mooring committee, and every Saturday of his life he was down at the yacht club working on the moorings together with a team of other guys from the yacht club. Dad continued his sailing and competed in all the regattas at the Continental Offshore Week in Port Elizabeth. I remember driving down and competing in 2 of those events with Dad, and the second event we decided to retire, and I wasn't sure at the time why, but Dad said we needed to retire. And after the weekend of the sailing I went back to Joburg, unknown to me that Dad went to see the cardiologist, and it was decided that he needed a triple bypass. Dad went into the surgery, he came out well. At the same time, Dad had found out that Mum had breast cancer, so he was very supportive of Mum during this time when she required surgery. A few years after his retirement, Mum and Dad drove up to Joburg to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary with all of us, and ironically or amazingly enough, at that 50th anniversary was also Mum's maid of honor and Dad's best man from their wedding that 50 years ago. We had a wonderful celebration at Gold Reef City in one of the conference centers to celebrate Mom and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary, which was a truly remarkable milestone. It was due to Mom and Dad's health that Dad decided to sell the boat and concentrate on his workshop, which he had built up over the years building the boat. And Dad started building all kinds of things for us, and if he thought we needed something like a toilet roll holder in the house or a computer stand, he would build us in the workshop at his house, and this was available for us when we came down on holiday to collect and take back to our place. So Dad continued working and supporting his family and his grandkids on all these projects throughout his life, helping us wherever needed with things like building these little wooden projects, tables, all kinds of stuff that was really marvelous. When the grandkids came along, Dad was always there to spend time with them, to encourage them, to help them as much as he did with us. Wherever he could, Dad was there for that. Mom and Dad were married for a truly amazing 65 years of their lives. On Mom's passing, it was like for Dad, was like a knife through the center of his heart, and he struggled. At the age of 92, Dad has now joined Mom. We would like to thank you all for attending this morning. It has been an honor to do this for our father. Lastly, I would like to thank our sister for being there for our dad to take care of him in his final years. Thank you, Jakes.
Thank you.